Well, I am a seven-time congressman in that I've been elected to Congress seven times previously. I'm a former state legislator and a former staffer for my predecessor. I worked here in the district in Southwest Michigan. But more importantly, I'm a husband and dad to five. I'm a small business owner as well. We have a third generation sand and gravel operation that a cousin and I still own. My sons have all worked in it as their summer job as well as that's what I did when I was going to college. I'm a man who's been very involved and integrated into the community, both on a personal level, a business level, and then with this unique legislative part of my life as well. So I think I have a really interesting balance of both one foot firmly planted in the legislative process, but also one in the real world economy and what's been going on, and whether it's inflation or supply chain issues, those kinds of things. So I think it gives me a very unique understanding and experience as I go in and become someone who has to make decisions on things like tax reform or regulation or everyday life issues that we deal with when we're in the House of Representatives. Well, there's a lot left unfinished. Everything from our national debt, which is becoming unwieldy in a way that I think many of us have been warning about, but maybe becoming more understood by the general public. Obviously, there's going to be a change in the administration, one way or the other. There's going to be a different president at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Excuse me, I'm fighting to make sure that we maintain a majority in the House of Representatives. And I'm hoping that Michigan is going to be at the forefront of flipping the U.S. Senate as well, because I think we've gotten out of balance. The administrative state, the bureaucracy that has been imposing just an avalanche of regulation onto small businesses has caused real economic damage. And so I want to continue to work on those issues. I want to make sure that banking and insurance is accessible to small rural communities. I just did a interview with Michigan Farm Radio about some issues that they were dealing with, and something that we talked about is exactly that. The financing that small rural communities are getting squeezed out on is real. But we also have large manufacturers, whether it's in food, with Kellogg and Post in the 4th Congressional District, whether it's office furniture makers like Hayworth, or whether it's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 automotive suppliers, Gentex, and so many others in the area. We've got to have a healthy economy that allows for all of the various parts of the 4th Congressional District to thrive. So manufacturing, agriculture, not just the growing, but the producing, but then also the tourism that is needed to have most of our smaller lakefront communities thrive. They're dependent, though, on people having extra money in their bank account and feeling secure about their economic future, not worried about the price at the gas pump or at the grocery store. So we've got to make life more affordable for Americans, and that is a key goal of mine. Well, I think a little bit in my introduction, I talked about a background in business, in small family business and construction. But then my time as a legislator, both at the state level and the federal level, it's just exposed me to so many different issues and so many different things. Whether it's how power plants and the power grid and the electric system work, to how healthcare does or doesn't work, quite frankly, how transportation issues are dealt with, how we make sure that we have a manufacturing supply chain that works here. So I think that the breadth of the issues that I've been exposed to over the years, plus the knowledge that I've gained being in the small business realm myself with family business, I think that makes me uniquely qualified to go in and really weigh and counterbalance whether it's a tax proposal or whether it's a regulation that is coming down from a regulator or a piece of legislation, to be able to say, okay, this is how it's going to help or hurt our communities. And that to me is the key thing, is making sure that we have a government that works for people, not against people. And it feels like the government has been working against folks as they've been struggling to make ends meet. Well, I think first and foremost, it is life affordability. It has gotten too expensive, as we've talked about, whether it's pulling up to the gas station or whether it's going to the grocery store. Far too many people are having to make decisions about whether their kids are going to be able to get new shoes or clothes for school versus whether they're going to be able to put groceries on the table. Wages have not kept pace with the rate of inflation that we are seeing. And yes, inflation has slowed, but it had such a monumental spike over the last year and a half, that a 3% increase is a lower percentage, but after you've already seen a 15% increase, it's exponential as to what is costing families to live and survive. So let me just address that. How do we get at that? And the energy level, we have got to unleash American energy. We are far too dependent on places like Venezuela, Russia, Iran, for world energy, including U.S. energy, and we're not working with our allies like Canada or tapping into our own domestic reservoirs here in the United States. And I would argue that's for political reasons, not for economic reasons. And that's just foolish in my mind. Why in the world would we go beg the Saudis or any other country for their energy when we have untapped energy reserves here? And this administration, day one, stopped things like the Keystone Pipeline and a number of other really, I think, helpful things that we have been doing on federal property and federal lands to go in and utilize properly our own resources. So that affordability issue is a big one. Secondarily, we have got to make sure that we have a tax code that works not just for big manufacturers. I'm more concerned about those small and medium-sized family-owned businesses that really are the engine that drive our economy. We know in 2025, this coming year, we are going to have a large tax rewrite and making sure that a voice is at the table that is worried more about Main Street than Wall Street, and about big the big publicly traded companies. We've got to make sure that our small companies, those mom and pop operations, are able to thrive. You never know when those grow into a larger company, by the way, but they're not going to be able to do that if they are strangled at the very beginning of the entire process of them growing. So that is going to be a challenge that is going to affect everybody from Ford all the way down to the local pizza shop owner. How we deal with the tax environment, that's a crucial part. And so then I think the third thing that we continue to work on, I'm co-chair of the Great Lakes Task Force. I've been a part of the PFAS task force, and what we've done on the Great Lakes is really trying to make sure that both the economy and the ecology of the Great Lakes remains healthy and vibrant, and it can coexist. It has coexisted over decades, but it's also been abused. So we need to make sure whether it's PFAS or whether it's invasive species, that we keep an eye towards making sure that we have a clean, good environment within the Great Lakes ecosystem, but also making sure that we utilize it properly for shipping and with our harbors and those kinds of things. And that, again, dealing with the supply chain, making sure that we have a healthy supply chain will help address some of those first issues about affordability for many of those families. And whether it's moving grain and produce and soybeans, there's actually a fair amount of soybeans that get moved around on the Great Lakes, or whether it's aggregate that goes into building supplies, or whether it is telgonite and other things that are part of steel making that we use here in Michigan and in the upper Midwest to go build vehicles and build office furniture. We've got to make sure that all of that is utilized and protected, but properly. There's certainly philosophical differences between the Republicans and the Democrats, but oftentimes I find the divide in Washington isn't necessarily whether you have an R or a D behind your name. Oftentimes it's about where you come from regionally. People out in California think differently than people from Texas or the upper Midwest or New England. And I joke in many ways that Michigan, Montana, and Mississippi and Massachusetts only have one thing in common, which is the letter M at the beginning of the name of the state. We have just different ideas about sometimes how that things move forward, and that isn't necessarily reflected in R versus D. There's also, in addition to those regional differences, there's sort of longevity issues, right? We have older folks that have been around, and I'm maybe on the cusp of that at this point, but I'm thinking of a number of older folks who are still serving, that they just have a different view of how the world works, and whether it's with AI or cryptocurrencies. Those are two issues that I do a lot of work with in my financial services committee work. They may not be understanding where we are going as a society, and that could be a difference as well. What I've done to combat that is been very purposefully involved in things like the Great Lakes Task Force. Marcy Kaptur, Democrat from Ohio, and I have been working together for basically a decade on these issues. We have a mutual respect. I joke that sometimes Marcy and I struggle to agree on which day of the week it is, but we agree on Great Lakes issues and some of the goals and objectives. And so we have brought together, whether it's funding through the appropriations process, whether it is policy issues like PFAS, we've been able to work together. More recently, I have become the chairman of something called the Bipartisan Fiscal Forum, the BFF. We actually chose that name on purpose, very intentionally. And the reason is we want to focus in on a bipartisan basis how we're going to fix and address our debt and our deficit situation. This past year was the first time that we saw interest on the debt outpace our defense spending. Let that sink in. Interest on the debt that we have is now greater than all the spending we have on defense. All of the spending that we have on every single program in the federal government that touches children, for example. It's soon going to outpace all of our Medicare and Medicaid spending as well. So we have got to address that. The BFF is very much focused on that. Scott Peters, a Democrat from Southern California, and I are the co-chairs. We've got a bipartisan steering committee group that meets on a regular basis. And this past year, we were actually able to pass a bipartisan bill through the House Budget Committee. It's the first time that we've been able to do this, to establish a commission to look at our debt and our deficits. The Senate co-sponsors of that were Joe Manchin and Mitt Romney. Both Joe and Mitt came to the House Budget Committee hearing room to testify on their version of the bipartisan bill that Scott and I had introduced. And so not only were we working in a bipartisan manner, we were working bicamerally, making sure that the House and the Senate just weren't heading off in completely different directions. We were having very, very productive conversations with the White House. And then, quite honestly, the political folks got a hold of it and said, no, 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 wait a minute, this is way too good of a political football to use. And then so we saw Joe Biden, President Biden, take a swipe at that during his State of the Union address, and shortly after that, we saw the Trump administration or the Trump campaign seeing a vulnerability there. They kind of piled on it as well. So we've got work on both sides of the issue that we have to do with both of the major party candidates. Kamala Harris has adopted the same position that Joe Biden has, and so we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but we're not going to give up. This is too important for our nation's future and for our kids and our grandkids' future to make sure that we're viable. And just throwing money at problems in Washington, D.C. doesn't mean that problem is getting solved. We have to realize that and address that. And so that's part of the bipartisan work that we've been doing to address it.